Okay, everybody, I want to talk to you about color before I move on to the next tutorial. I want to talk about how to set color through various color codes. Then I'd like to take a look at some color tools that you have available to look at. The first thing I want to show you or tell you about is the idea of in a web and in coding for a website, you're dealing with what's called additive color. And so what I want to show you is the additive color wheel. I would say that this is probably your best tool to see additive color. And the idea here is that we're looking at a screen monitor, and what it does is just radiate light outwards. This is not like your art class where you have light in the room and it bounces off and the paint might absorb some of the light waves and reflect some of it back. Here, it's entirely generating from your screen coming at you. And so if there are no colors coming out, it's black. And then the colors are made up of a combination of red, green, and blue on a monitor. And as you add red and green, you get yellow. As you add red and blue, you get magenta. When you add green and blue together, you get cyan. In fact, if you ever go to a store where you're going to get a color toner for a color printer, you'd usually get it in CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and then K has to do with black because in a printer, of course, you're putting ink on a page. But it is kind of interesting that they use those three colors, which actually happen to be the combinations of red and green, red and blue, and green and blue in no particular order. So the idea is as you add more color, you go from basically black, no color, to white. So there's a couple other color things I'd like to sort of point out. First thing is, if you want to, you can just set the color, background color to red as a keyword, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So basically, that's a really bright red background. In case you were wondering, I did add some paragraphs of text to help kind of illustrate some of the color schemes for a later tutorial. So that's one way of doing it. You have keywords, and your browsers will recognize a good number of keywords, but you're still limited in the number of colors that you have available. So there's other tools that you can use as well. And the one that you're going to see, I'm just going to go ahead and do the RGB, mainly because you see it down below. And the R is for red, G is for green, B is for blue. And you can set it two different ways. You can set it using percentages, like how much red, how much green, how much blue as far as a percentage. And I'll go ahead and do that. If we set all three to 100% and we hit refresh, we get white. Like I said, you're adding all the colors. I gotta hide this and stop showing that. If we do them all 0%, then it's black as I've demonstrated, but I figured it's worthwhile just to do it at least once. Hit refresh, bam, we're at black. That looks kind of cool actually, honestly. Not bad. And we go back to 100% of red, gives us red. Okay, that's not the only way to do it. The other way to do it is kind of a weird way, and that's, you might think it's weird, is you can do just regular integers, and you can go from 0 to 255. So to keep it red, I'm going to make the red be 255, the green 0, the blue 0. I'm going to go over to the page and hit refresh, and you'll notice it's still red. That's because 255 is the maximum value we can have. This is based on a thing, basically the architecture of your computer is that information is stored in bytes. And 1 byte can represent either the number 0 or the number 255 or any number in between from 0 to 255. So that means we can have 256 different values of red, 256 different values of green, and 256 different values of blue, which means to store a pixel of an image requires at a minimum 3 bytes because you need 1 for red, 1 for green, 1 for blue. Sometimes you have transparent colors, and in that case, we add an A, and the A stands for alpha. If we give an alpha of 0 and we save our changes, we have no red. If we have a value of 1, we have all red. If we want 50%, you just put 0.5, which is halfway between 0 and 1, or 50%. And so you can adjust the visibility of this color using the alpha, what they call it. By the way, you'll hear the term channel. Each one of these are channels, and each channel is, like I said, represented using a byte in your computer. It's a lot of information. But that's RGB, RGBA. You can use percentages or the numbers 0 through 255. In alpha, it's between 0 and 1, using any of these numbers anywhere in between that number. To what precision, I don't know, not a huge concern of mine. I usually stick to a point like in 10%, or I can do like 55%, like 0.55, and then make it a little bit more red, as you can see. So that's RGB and RGBA. There are 2 more color codes, and I'm just going to go ahead and try to, well, I'll just go ahead and go back here. I'm going to take the alpha off for a reason, and that's because I want to show you hexadecimal. So I'm going to set background color twice, and the second time I'm going to set it to this color. I'm going to do FF0000. Now, the interesting thing about hexadecimal is that it's probably something you've seen before if you do web design, and you will come across again. And honestly, it's very similar to RGB. So the first 2 numbers, and yes, 2 letters of F is actually, technically speaking, a number. FF is actually the number 255. And the reason why that is that in hexadecimal, so I'm going to add a little thing up here. This is base 16, okay? Now, our standard number system is base 10, and that is, you got the numbers the digits 0 through 9, okay? So if I were to use the number 10, I would put a 1 in the tens place and a 0 in the ones place, because I ran out of digits. I could only count up to 9, and I had to go higher, so I had to go here. So hexadecimal is base 16, and that would be 0 through F. And so A actually equals the number 10, and B equals 11, and so on until we get to F, which equals 15. And the first thing you might be going is, wait a minute, I thought you said it's base 16, so what happened to the number 16? Well, what happened to the number 10 and base 10? It's not there because the 10th digit, or rather the first one, is 0. And in base 16, the first one is 0 too. So in base 10, we have 0 through 9 for a total of 10 possible digits. And in the case of hexadecimal, you have 0 through F, which is 0 through 15, for a total of 16 possible digits. So if we have in hexadecimal basically 2 digits, what we are saying is we're putting an F in the ones place and an F in the, in case you guessed it, it's the 16s place. In other words, FF is the same as F times 16 plus F, or 15 times 16 plus 15. I hope this makes sense, but let's just do the math in our browser. 15 times 16 plus 15, I'll hit enter again so you can see it's the number 255. That's because we have a 15 in the 16s place, which means 15 times 16. And we add a 15 in the ones place, that gives us 255. And as you can see, the hexadecimal code is designed to allow each one of these to represent, these 2 digits to represent a byte. Okay, so now you kind of know. You don't need to know how to calculate all these. You don't need to actually do math. But let's just break it down a little, and let's get rid of some of these zeros and move the F into the middle, save our changes. By the way, by putting that at the end, it means like this line 11 overrides this line 10 because it comes later. Now you can see 00FF00 represents green. So that's hexadecimal. Now there's all kinds of tools that will calculate it for you. In fact, one of the things you can do is a hex to, you can do converters. You can do a hex to RGB, and you can get some calculators that will convert from hexadecimal FF0000. So we have hexadecimal and we have RGB. So in case you didn't believe me, there it is. And you can switch from RGB to hex. And so you can, by the way, here's what's kind of cool is you can kind of visualize what happens as you adjust the color. So this is not a bad way of doing it until you get the color that you want, excuse me. Click convert. Now that's a hexadecimal color for that form of purple. All right, that's hexadecimal. And I wanted to give you one last one here. And this is, I like the green. We're gonna go back to one more. I'm gonna see if I can get this right the first try. It's called hsla. And by the way, there's HSL and HSLA, so I'll start with HSL. Now, this stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. Hue is the color. Saturation is how much of the color. If it is 100% saturation, it's purely that color. If it's 0, that's an entirely desaturated color. In other words, there is no saturation, which means there is no color. It's a form of gray. And L stands for lightness. Okay? The first digit you give has to be an integer. It actually stands for a degree around the color wheel. Now to get this, I need to show you one more. And that is, I went to colorsontheweb.com/color-theory/the color wheel. This shows you the color wheel. And as you can see, we start at the top. 0 for hue would be red. Let's demonstrate that. I said I was going to try to get it the first try, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to give it a 0. And then now I'm going to do a saturation of 100%. Give it a percentage. And now for lightness, we're going to give it 50%. And the reason why we're giving it 50% is it's like if we go to 100%, it's going to be pure white. If we give it 0, it would be black. I'll prove it to you once I find green. So let's go back to our page, hit refresh. It should be red, and it is. So I'm going to go over back to wherever we were, colors on the wheel. And we're going to try to get that green, which is, this would be 90 degrees. Let's do about 120. We'll put 120 in. Let's see if I get it right the first time. Save changes. Hit refresh on my page. And green. Got it. All right, let's play around with the saturation. Let's make it desaturated. Means there's no color at all. And what would life be like with no color? It would be like nighttime, right? As it gets darker, we get less light. We lack the ability to see colors. It's just one of those phenomena that happens. And let's give it 50% saturation. And now you can see the green, but it's not as bright as it was before. Let's go back to 100%, save our changes, and we'll give 0% lightness, which should make it black. And I'm right. And then we go back here and we give it 100%, and it should be white because it's 100% lightness. It's so light, it's white. So usually what you're going to want to do is usually pick a 50%. But the cool thing about this is that you can come up with really interesting color combinations using HSLA. Oh, I forgot to mention there is an A as well. So we can add our transparency in here. We'll put 0.7, which would be or 7.5, which would be 75% opacity. Go back here, hit refresh. It's green, semi-opaque. And at this point, I think I've covered all of the color codes you could get. And in my next tutorial, I'll talk about some of the color tools that you have available. Stay tuned for that, and thank you so much for watching.